IVM.
Storytel is an audiobook platform that lets you hear hundreds of thousands of stories on your mobile, on your PC, wherever you prefer. You can get a great deal by signing up at the URL storytel.com/IVM. So this week I'm going to recommend Watership Down by Richard Adams. It's a quirky book. It's the story of a group of rabbits, how they face the destruction of their den and subsequent escape and journey to their new home. It's funny, it's heartwarming, really cool. It's basically Exodus with rabbits. I think you'll enjoy it if you haven't read it before, and let me tell you a little bit about where you can go get it. Go get it at storytel.com/IVM, and you know what will happen? If you go and sign up on this link, you'll get your first month for just 99 rupees a month instead of $299. That's $200 off. Go get this book right now. You'll really enjoy it.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to all new episode of All Things Policy. If 2020 was the year of the pandemic, 2021 is the year of vaccines. China, India, Russia, the US and many other countries have entered this mad race to produce and supply the COVID vaccine to domestic and international population. Unsurprisingly, China is leading in this race, but India and Russia are not very far behind. Although India has adopted a neighborhood first approach in distribution of its vaccine, China has distributed its dosage to parts of Asia, Africa, Europe, up to an extent, and even Latin America. Will China's distribution strategy have a geopolitical implication? I am Suyash Desai, and to discuss China's vaccine diplomacy, I am joined by Manoj Kevalramani, who heads the China and Indo-Pacific research cohorts at the Takshashila Institution. Hi Manoj, thank you for joining me in this podcast today.
Hi Suyash, thanks for having me.
Let us begin, Manoj, by understanding the term vaccine diplomacy. What does the term vaccine diplomacy mean, and does it have an impact on forwarding countries' soft power?
I think if you look at the idea of vaccine diplomacy, and it's very straightforward, right? I mean, there are countries which are researching and manufacturing vaccines for COVID-19 at the moment, and today there is a great diplomatic significance to it. There is a great sort of geopolitical significance to all of this, given the nature of the pandemic. What we've seen is that this is not something which was unanticipated over the past year as the pandemic hit and as the race to develop vaccines sort of began. You saw different candidates from different countries, investing money in that. You saw states working with companies to establish capacities, providing funding. You saw the sort of early announcement of the Sputnik vaccine by the Russians. And that just tells you that, there was an anticipation and understanding that this is a important business opportunity along with an important diplomatic geopolitical opportunity where you can become a provider of a certain good for countries around the world, and that will sort of raise your diplomatic profile. That will allow you to further other interests that you may have. So in that context is what I would look at sort of vaccine diplomacy. Does it expand your soft power? Yes. But I don't think I would worry so much about soft power. I think, yes, certain countries, of course, see it as a soft power issue. But there's also a case of, having deeper linkages, being in a position where you've aided certain countries in their time of need, particularly given, when we're talking about the reach of vaccines at the moment. And I was looking at some data and I realized that, this is what the WHO put out a couple of days ago, where it says that, out of the 128 million vaccine doses administered so far, more than 3/4 are just in 10 countries that account for 60% of global GDP. Essentially, it's the much more well-off countries where you're seeing the vaccines being, administered. It says that the WHO also says that, almost 130 countries with 2.5 billion people in them are yet to administer a single dose. So it just tells you that there is this tremendous space where, people are not being vaccinated even right now for a various set of reasons. And that presents a diplomatic opportunity for countries that want to take it. So in that sense, yes, it will expand your soft power, but it will also do much more than that. If you're effective and if you're seen as a reliable partner, it can lead to long-term business development. It can also lead to deeper sort of political relations. And of course, at the end of the day, the goodwill that you might end up generating with populations.
Correct. Manoj, I would like to focus your attention on China. So China is offering vaccine at a much more subsidized rate. Is there any strategy for Chinese vaccine distribution? That's my first question. And my linked question to this is, are they prioritizing the BRI countries, or how is their strategy working out?
I think it's sort of important to look at firstly, what are the different Chinese vaccines and who's making them and what what's the role of this party state in all of this? And I mean, the four leading sort of Chinese candidates, I mean, there are two from Sinopharm, and Sinopharm is a state-owned enterprise. And this is not just Sinopharm, right? There are different entities, including with Sinopharm, but this is sort of popularly known as a Sinopharm vaccine. Then there is the Sinovac vaccine, which is, again, it's a privately owned enterprise. And then there is CanSino, which is also privately owned, but the vaccine is developed with the Chinese military academy, the Academy of Military Medical Sciences. So there are these four big candidates, right? So far, Chinese regulators have approved for widespread use within China the Sinopharm and then the Sinovac vaccine very recently. So that's the first thing to understand, which are the key vaccines. Now, I think most of these vaccines are on the sort of inactivated dose system. So it's the more traditional way in which these vaccines have been developed. And therefore, the Chinese argument is that, look, this is safer and so on and so forth. So that's the first part of their strategy. The second has been that just like Pfizer, Moderna and the others, the Chinese vaccines also had external trials. Most of them has external trials, and there are sort of different details about the efficacy of the vaccine from very, very different places. So I'll just give you an example, right? The Sinovac vaccine, which has been among the more controversial ones in some ways because the efficacy rates varied from area to area, right? It's in Brazil, initially we heard about an efficacy rate of 50.65%, and then, initially we heard a 70-odd% efficacy rate, then it was 50.65. So that led to a lot of confusion. And then Sinovac had to clarify some of those things. The success rate in a Turkish trial was 91.25%. apparently, but this was a very small sample apparently that was taken. Third, there was an efficacy trial in Indonesia in which the rate was 65.3%. So again, really different rates of efficacy, which led to lots of confusion. And once the Brazil data came in first, which was that just over the threshold of 50%, that led to many countries which had already signed agreements thinking about reassessing their options and saying, look, no, they sort of sought to assure their public, and they sought to sort of issue statements saying that we need to first approve it on our own, and then we will sort of take it. We won't just randomly take it. So that's one part of it, right? That there are these different candidates. Some are private, some are state-owned. Most of them are there is an interlinkage. And the government is sort of encouraging the sales of these. How did the government encourage the sales of these? Well, leading up to the vaccines becoming publicly available, the Chinese government sort of allowed for negotiation between different states from government to government level, also at private level, where you could negotiate, pre-sales of vaccines. So, for example, with Indonesia, there was an agreement signed in late 2020 where, China said that we would provide you X number of vaccines. And those vaccines were obviously procured and then be provided to the Indonesians. And those are at cost. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, that none of this is, charity, free of cost. All of this is at cost, and there is a price to be paid for each of these things. There has been some reportage about Beijing extending $1 billion loan for Latin American countries to be able to procure the vaccines, which, you can look at that in the context of BRI, where, you're trying to provide loans to be able to procure Chinese products. With Africa, again, Beijing has sort of been very clear that is an area of our priority, and they will be providing vaccines on a priority basis to lesser developed countries and to Africa. So that's one part of their strategy, that you're focusing on lesser developed countries, and particularly Africa. Last year, when they had that extraordinary summit between African states and China. So that's, again, one of the things to keep in mind. The last thing is that, you've heard Xi Jinping say this again and again, that China will use the vaccine as a global public good. The definition of a public good is essentially something that is non-excludable, non-rivalrous, but that's not how actually things are happening. The vaccine by that definition cannot be, it is excludable, it is rivalrous. So, you can't sort of use that. So what you're seeing is that they're saying they've sort of remodeled that to say we will make the reach as wide as possible and as inexpensive as possible. That's what their argument is. Now, having said that, there is really no clarity about the exact nature of the agreements that have been signed, the exact costing. It's not necessarily all in the public domain. So we don't know what's being charged, what's being paid. From what we do understand also is that the rates of these vaccines differ from country to country where they are being sold. Because again, there's such a high demand, and there's such low capacity that exists. The last thing that the Chinese are doing with all of this is they've invested tremendous amounts in building capacity to be able to create more dosages, right? So they've invested, Sinovac and Sinopharm together say that they can produce about 2 billion doses by the end of this year. That's a significant number. What Beijing is now doing is that it's vaccinating its sort of most vulnerable populations while exporting also, which it says is, of course, something that it's doing in order to support, a global improvement. So if I was to sort of summarize what their strategy is, the strategy is essentially to be able to build capacity, which is, at the moment, we're anticipating 2 billion doses for the year, to be able to vaccinate parts of their most vulnerable population, but also to be able to export largely to developing countries, because that's where they see the opportunities that lie. In this export, there are obviously commercial agreements that are being signed. Do those commercial agreements entail a loan component to be taken from China? At least in some cases, we've heard of it, but the details are very, very sparse. So there's no way to really say that, yes, that's certainly the case. And lastly is to also contribute to this global COVAX distribution system. China has committed that they will contribute 10 million doses to the global vaccine sharing scheme COVAX. And they're going to be doing that. They've also committed money over there. So they're looking at it from that holistic perspective. And that's how I would define the strategy. In terms of specific countries, I don't think they've specifically made a reference of late to BRI countries being prioritized. But if you look at the list of countries that so far Chinese vaccines have gone to, and from a couple of days ago, the foreign ministry gave a list of 13 countries. These included Pakistan, Brunei, Nepal, Philippines, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Palestine, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, and so on. All of these are part of BRI. So you could look at it from that point of view. How the Chinese are pitching it is that we're looking at developing countries that are in need, which is an important narrative from their point of view, given that the other narrative has been that, and which is what the WHO is also pointing out, right? In my first comment that I made, that the West or developed countries have sort of, in some ways cornered much of the vaccine distribution.
Correct. My next question was supposed to be about Africa, Manoj, but you have already addressed a part of it. Moving on to the next question. Do we have any information regarding the adaptability of Chinese vaccine with the newer strains that are being found, like the UK strain or the South African strain? That's number one. And number two, and this is not particularly related to China, but any country which is producing vaccines, so also related to India, Russia, or the West, a few Western countries. So they will be in a fix, or they will have an image problem if this vaccine doesn't work. So how are they tackling or handling these situations?
Look, I think at present, in terms of trying to figure out whether the vaccine has efficacy with regard to these new strains that we are talking about, it's too early to have data specifically to answer that question. I mean, at the moment, the Chinese have been fairly sketchy in giving out all data with regard to all the vaccines that they've developed. So, for example, Sinovac's, I just spoke about Sinovac's efficacy data, which has been varied across different areas. So that's one thing. There have been sort of questions about other things also. But I mean, right now, I don't think that necessarily is one of the big sort of issues. In general, what is established is that these vaccines have over the sort of base requirement efficiency. That is the first thing that's been established. You also know that because it's not like this is just being exported. China is doing a significant amount of vaccination at home, right? I mean, as of February 9th, they had administered more than 40 million doses at home. So obviously they see efficacy in that, right? Now, the biggest challenge from their point of view is capacity. I spoke about the desire to build to have 2 billion doses by the end of the year. But just compare the capacity challenge from the fact that, at the end of sort of last year, in December last year, the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention was talking about distributing around 100 million doses at home before the start of the new year. The new year is just around the corner tomorrow, and we are at about 40 odd or maybe 45 million doses, 40 or 50 million doses. So you're well short of your own domestic targets. In Brazil, there was this challenge where the vaccines were not delivered on time as was committed. And that was a huge problem because the Brazilians sort of made a fuss about it. And then, if you remember, India had sent vaccines, the Oxford vaccine, India had exported to Brazil, and that was discussed a lot in the Indian media. And that was because, again, a matter of capacity shortages, but that led to some sort of a political friction between Brazil and China. Similarly, in Turkey, the government had initially promised about 10 million doses of Sinovac vaccine would be arriving in December, but only 3 million had arrived till January. That's according to the Turkish health minister. So it tells you a little bit about the fact that capacity is the issue. And the Chinese themselves acknowledge that look, capacity is an issue. And that's where we are sort of struggling. And it's not just about developing the dose. It's also about the supporting infrastructure around the dose, right? How do you store it? You need to have enough vials and those sorts of things. And all of that is a manufacturing challenge. So while there has been lots of effort gone into building that capacity, it still is a challenge to be able to do this in time. The Chinese argument is that, look, because our vaccines rely on traditional methods, and of course they argue that the efficacy is very good, they are easier for developed countries to use because storage is not an issue. Temperatures at which they need to be stored is not an issue. Whereas some of the other vaccines, they rely on different technology, the mRNA technology, and the storage can be an issue because you need a certain kind of temperatures for that, which can be a challenge, particularly when you're transporting them over long distances. So that's the argument that the Chinese have made. But I think their primary concern right now is in terms of capacity. But sort of one more thing that I wanted to highlight in this is that some of this business of, again, you talked about soft power in the beginning, right? Some of this is a soft power opportunity, but there are also soft power challenges with all of this, particularly because there are such costs involved. An example of this was in Bangladesh, right? Bangladesh was in talks with China for the Sinovac vaccine. There was an issue because Bangladesh, there was a discussion over the cost sharing with regard to trials to be conducted in Bangladesh, the clinical trials that have to be conducted. This is according to sort of Indian media reports. The Hindustan Times had reported that Dhaka refused to share the cost of the trials, and the Chinese firms, Sinovac, basically said that, this is the condition in every country, so you have to pay the bill. And that became an issue. And it was at the same time where India sort of stepped in to say that we are going to be gifting 2 million doses of vaccine to Dhaka. And this was in late January. And then sort of Bangladesh also goes and strikes a separate deal with Serum Institute in India to, order to purchase 30 million doses. So like you see, right, because companies are negotiating, it's not necessarily just government to government, it can also be a challenge. And like I said, Sinovac is a private entity and it's negotiating separately. So that can also present its own challenges in that sense. The last thing is that because of these differences in efficacy data, there has to be something about public confidence in Chinese vaccines. And that is not necessarily among the greatest in the world. There was a survey done by YouGov recently, and it looked at the efficacy, sort of public perceptions with regard to which vaccine would you get if you had an option, right? And generally, the Chinese vaccine didn't score very well. Say, for example, in India, it scored very poorly. In Mexico, it scored well. In Indonesia, it scored well. But in other places, Singapore, etc., it didn't necessarily score very well. Australia had scored very poorly, Italy, the UK, the US. So I think that's something to look at in terms of how public perception is shaped. And I think that's something to be considered. I mean, for example, Indian perceptions of the Russian vaccine were far more positive than with regard to the Chinese vaccine. You had negative perceptions with regard to Chinese vaccine, but you had very positive perceptions with regard to the Russian vaccine. So I think that's something to be looked at also from the point of view of the amount of effort and political input that has gone into this diplomacy, yet the outcomes that Beijing is getting, I don't think are commensurate to it.
It's interesting that you brought India, Manoj, because my final question to you in this podcast is about India. India is one of the major producers of the vaccine, and they have adopted a neighborhood-first approach for vaccine distribution. How are China and India competing in South Asia and the larger Indo-Pacific region with regards to the vaccine distribution? As you've already highlighted an instance from Bangladesh. Are there any such instances, or how are these two countries competing here?
I think from an Indian point of view, yes, you need to be keeping an eye at opportunities and at challenges, but I think it is very limiting and reductive to look at our diplomacy in the region from the lens of competing with China. Particularly with regard to the vaccines. I think given India's sort of strength in manufacturing vaccines, that's our strength. Our strength was not the research, but it was actually the manufacturing. And we've leveraged that strength as time has come. And I think we need to continue doing that. We don't need to look at it from the point of view of competing with the Chinese, because our neighbors are not going to be looking at it from the point of view of competition between two powers. Our neighbors are going to be looking at it just like any other country, just like we are looking at it domestically in the context of trying to protect your citizens from the threat of COVID-19, and also to be able to have enough confidence that you can restart the economy, ease healthcare burdens, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to put ourselves in their shoes also and and look at it from that point of view. I'm not saying that the government is not. I'm just saying that even the public discourse should be around that, rather than thinking of competing with the Chinese, because. And you have an opportunity, you have your strengths in this thing, and you should be leveraging those strengths. If the Chinese can also provide vaccines to people and that can kickstart their economy, well and good. The terms of negotiation for these contracts will themselves shape behaviors and attitudes of different countries, just like we saw in the case of Bangladesh, right? If the terms are coercive, countries will themselves come to a point and, to the point where they understand that, look, dealing with the Chinese in certain cases can be exploitative, and dealing with India in this case can be beneficial. And it sort of shapes also attitudes of the elite. So I think we need to not think of it from the point of view of just competition. We need to do what we are doing and do it effectively. Because if we claim to be, the regional power which, wants to guide developments in the region, it's important for us to also be able to shoulder the responsibilities that come with that. And I think we've done so far quite well with that. So I think that's the attitude, that's the approach that we need to look at from a point of view of India playing a larger role in the region and at the global stage at the point of time of an unprecedented crisis, rather than looking at it from the point of view of a lens of, competition with China.
On that very note, let me thank you, Manoj, for your insight on China's foreign policy approach through its vaccine diplomacy. If you like our take on China's strategic issues, you can subscribe to Manoj's newsletter, Eye on China, and his daily blog post on the Chinese People's Daily. I also write a weekly newsletter on the Chinese Armed Forces called the PLA Insight. We will provide the links in the show notes. Thank you, Manoj, once again, and thank you for listening to All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Storytel and TheWholeTruthFoods.com. So, great week on the network. Number of really, really interesting shows for you guys to check out. Here are a couple of the ones that I would like to highlight for you. Check out This Round Is On Me. Gauri Devi Dayal talks to her husband Jay Yusuf about mixing business and pleasure. They're the husband and wife business partners at Food Matters Company. Give it a shot. Really fun show. On Nankari, they speak about chaat, the queen of the street foods. A fun episode. They canvass the beauty and romance of street food, its cultural importance in a city, and they also discuss the unfortunate harassment that street vendors sometimes go through. On Paisa Vaisa, we had Madhuchanda. They joined Anupam talking about the budget and the different aspects of it. Storytellers and Storytellers features Shreyansh Pandey, creator of Gulak, a great conversation and some interesting insights into facilitating and nurturing writers. Do check that out. On Thale Harate, the Kannada podcast, Mansi Prasad spoke to Pawan Srinath about the history and appreciation of Indian music. It's a really interesting conversation. They discuss classical music and how it evolved in India, what are the various musical instruments and how they developed. Really, really fun, interesting stuff. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Hey, I'm Zarina, your peak performance coach, leadership coach, and life coach. And I'm here to unleash that power within you with your weekly dose of mantras and empowerment. Tune in to Monday Mantras every Monday for your quick fix and the Empowering Series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday for riveting real-life stories. You can catch us on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.